by and talk to us after the event this evening. Tonight is really about education. There will be no decisions made this evening. This evening really is about educating the community, asking questions, and really have to have everyone come and wrap their minds around what these zoning regulations and design standards, these drafts, really mean. I also really just want to take an opportunity to thank you all for being here tonight, because if you were in my household, my 10-year-old son is wondering, what the heck am I doing here when the Warriors are playing the Thunder? So there's a real commitment to be here this evening. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
So thank you. I just want to reiterate thank you again for coming this evening with us to talk about our first of 3 topic discussions. Our meeting tonight will be focused on the zoning and design standards. So before I do a brief introduction, I just wanted to, Christina is available here to do Spanish translation. If anyone is interested in receiving translation, Christina is over here. Me. And so before I turn it off to Debbie, who will be help facilitating our meeting, I just want to also introduce a few members here. We did have Councilmember Wheeler and Councilmember Carlton. Also with us this evening is Planning Commissioner John Cavani. Over here, I did see Planning Commissioner Catherine Strell, who is also a member of the General Plan Advisory Committee. We have Kristen Garcetti, who is a member of our General Plan Advisory Committee representing the Environmental Quality Commission. And from staff, we have a number of resources here this evening. We have our Assistant City Manager, Chip Taylor, our Community Development Director, Arlinda Heineck, our Transportation Manager, Nikki Nagaya, our Housing and Economic Development Manager, Jim Kogan, and we have from our PlaceWorks team, our consulting team here with us, we have Charlie Knox, we have Rosie Dudley, and we have Bruce Brubaker. And I am Deanna Chow, I'm also in the planning department, and with that, I will hand it over to Debbie Schechter of PCRC.
So again, thanks everyone for coming out. I've met a number of you before, but not all of you. So I'll do my little spiel again. I'm Debbie Schechter. I'm with the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center. We are a communication and conflict resolution nonprofit here in San Mateo County. We partner with the City of Menlo Park to help them run community meetings like this to engage the community in issues that are important to you. And my role today is as a neutral facilitator to help guide the process, create an environment where you all feel comfortable participating and where your views can be heard, where you can get educated on the issues related to zoning, and where you can share your input. I have my colleague today here, Nel Marie Vilaro, is over there. She's going to help me out. Let's see, Ray already said the purpose of the meeting tonight is to get a little bit deeper education on the zoning and design standards. So many of you were at the meeting in January where the city went over those standards, and what they're going to do today, the city and PlaceWorks is going to talk about them in a little more detail and give you the opportunity to interact with city staff and the PlaceWorks staff and ask your questions and give your comments. So with that, I will review the agenda. So we're on the welcome and introductions part. Soon PlaceWorks will come up and give a presentation that includes the general plan overview and the zoning regulations and design standards. Then we will break out into 3 topic stations, and we'll describe those in a little more detail later in order for you to ask questions and give your comments. We'll come back in the large group to summarize some of the key questions and to allow you to make a few critical or key comments that you'd like to make before we end up with next steps and upcoming meetings. So one of the things that we do in our meetings to make sure that things run smoothly and that people feel comfortable is we have a series of group agreements. So if you've been at previous meetings, oh, thank you. Sorry, meeting objectives, we already went over this. Group agreements. They're on the wall over there and up here. So you all are familiar with these. Speak one at a time, speak respectfully, listen for understanding, knowing that everyone here comes from a different place and has a different perspective. Speak from your own experience, what you've experienced. Let the facilitator guide the process, and then also the one I forgot to put on there is if you could put your technology on silent, phones and laptops or whatever, that would be great. Thank you. As always, we will have, if key issues come up that are unrelated to today's topic but that are important to capture, we'll capture those in a parking lot. You all know where the bathrooms are located. There's food also, so feel free to help yourself, take care of yourself, whatever you need to do. So that's our setup for tonight. Again, I know many of you have come to previous meetings, so I just wanted to see by show of hands who has been to a previous meeting, a previous Connect Menlo meeting. Okay, that looks like everybody. Great, so you all know the drill. Okay, and I wanted to point out, you have hopefully picked up some materials as you walked in, copies of the presentation, the agenda, and also I want to note that on your tables there should be a bunch of index cards and pens so that you can jot down your questions and comments as they occur to you, so you won't forget them, and then we'll have you use those at the stations. Post your comments at the stations and ask your questions verbally of the staff and consultants there. So are folks okay? Can folks agree with the group agreements to follow those tonight? Can I see some heads nodding, please? Yes, excellent. Excellent. I know this is a great group. All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm just going to go briefly through the slides that provide some context. Again, I'm Charlie Knox. I'm with a company called PlaceWorks that is assisting the city with the general plan and zoning update. You've seen this graphic before. What's new on it, though, are the indications of where we've added more time in the process to take these so-called deep dives into the subjects of tonight zoning and design standards, next week green building and sustainable building standards, and 2 weeks after that community amenities. And so the General Plan Advisory Committee, including the council members on it, looked at this period between now and coming to some decision and recommendation of the General Plan Advisory Committee and decisions of Planning Commission and Council as a time where we needed to spend a little more time making sure the folks in the community have a chance to learn about, ask questions about the details in the proposed regulations for the M2 area from a zoning perspective to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about, and then when they make comments, those comments are rooted in that understanding. So again, as Councilmember Mueller introduced the item, this is about education. So there are no questions, there are no wrong questions, but please hold your questions until we're done with this presentation, because what we'll do is move those to these 3 stations, which are transportation over here, design standards in the middle, and then the zoning over there. They're relatively close together for ease of transfer between each, and then also the zoning station and the design station kind of share the need to look at the map that's got the street classifications and the zoning proposal. So I think there are enough of us that this separation is going to help the conversation, but if we're close enough, we can move back and forth easily. So again, I just want to point out here, we are very well through most of the way through this 2-year process. You can see that there are other components to the general plan update, including zoning provisions and, of course, the environmental impact report, environmental review. But we're nearing the finish line, and as we do so, we want to make sure folks understand exactly what it is that we're putting in front of the council for decision-making in September. We started the process the first 6 months to a year or so, really looking at the guiding principles that are framing the reasons why you're seeing the types of general plan programs and zoning and other municipal code suggestions that we're making. And what we've got circled in red here are 4 of the 9 guiding principles the community worked very hard to come up with, relate directly to what the zoning rules are on the ground in the M2 area. You may remember we spent a lot of time working on theoretical maximum development potential for the future of the M2 that takes into consideration both what's allowed in the existing general plan plus new development. and the new development pursuant to the city council direction would be considered by the council as possibly being allowed in exchange for the community getting amenities, a portion of the regional prosperity that's happening in Silicon Valley and the peninsula, and high quality development. So what you're going to look at tonight, what we'll be talking about at the station, are it's kind of characterized by three new zoning districts in the M2. As you'll see in a second, the M2 is really one blanket brush, kind of medium to light industrial zoning right now. And the idea was to break up the area into the three new zoning districts with different uses, different regulations. But as you'll see, and this is the existing zoning, so most of it's the purple, the M2. The three zoning districts sound like traditional single-use districts under so-called Euclidean zoning, which doesn't come from the Greek philosopher mathematician. It comes from a place in New Jersey where there was a lawsuit in the 1920s about whether or not you could regulate uses. But what they're really about is actually creating a liberal play environment by emphasizing one of those three uses over the others. So, for example, in the office district, you'll see housing is possible. Retail is possible and is desired. In the residential mixed-use district, commercial is desired and possible. Office is desired and possible. Life sciences is a little different because the nature of the life sciences businesses tends to want to have a buffer with housing, but again, commercial to serve those employees is available. So the idea is to create a liberal play environment that the community has said so strongly that we'd like to see happen here in the M2, and it's starting to happen little by little on its own, really requires emphasizing one use over another in these locations, but allowing the other things that make for a complete community. So this idea that community amenities would come along with new development if the city council decides to allow such, created this idea of bonus development. In other words, there's a base level of development that's currently allowed by the general plan and the zoning, and that would remain in place. The idea is if you want to go beyond that to do more than is allowed now, that would come with community amenities. And the types of more would be taller buildings, more floor area, more housing. So this map is in the middle between the zoning station and the design station, and basically it shows the office area in blue, the life sciences area in the lighter blue, there we go, and then these pockets of residential mixed use along Willow, in the Jefferson Drive area, and also on the east campus for Pace Road. So we can talk, when we get over to that map, we can talk more about these districts and what they mean. Basically, as I mentioned before, in office, in addition to a fair amount of office, about 700,000 square feet beyond what the current general plan allows, there will also be an additional 25% that would be non-office use that would complement the office environment, retail, restaurants, hotels. Life sciences would really encourage the whole life cycle of bioscience businesses, from incubation to full-fledged lab and manufacturing and office space. And then again, in residential, the idea is ground floor street front could also be used for commercial to benefit the residents of those developments. This table exists as a board. I don't expect you to see it from here, but basically what we use it for is to compare the districts to each other so you can see the differences and similarities for height, for setbacks, for all the regulations for zoning. Parking standards, which are on the board, transportation. Primarily the reason we're showing this slide is we're doing something a little new here, which is we have a minimum number of spaces, which is pretty much everywhere you go, but we're also talking about a maximum number to try to limit the number of vehicles, which we're trying to create a range whereby uses can prosper and operate efficiently, but we're not encouraging more vehicles to be parked and to come in and out of the M2 than are necessary. Also, for the first time in Menlo Park and many places, we're proposing requiring bicycle parking in development, as well as electric vehicle charging spaces. So on the transportation demand management side, I mean, basically this is a fancy term for things we need to do to make sure the traffic doesn't get any worse, doesn't have to be any worse than it otherwise has to be. And there's a goal of looking at development and determining how much traffic it would normally produce, and then trying to reduce that by the design of the development itself and by measures taken by the applicants to create a 20% reduction. And one of the keys in this is creation and requirement of participation in what's called a transportation management agency, so that all of the property owners and business owners in the M2 area would be able to pool their resources together to try to figure out ways to get people in and out during commute times without using single occupant vehicles, try to be on buses or other kinds of efficient ways to get people around, and really encourage walking and biking if and when at all possible. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Brubaker, who's our practice leader at PlaceWorks in Urban Design. He's going to go through a series of what's there today and what we're proposing. And there's a lot of images, but they're also on those two boards. So don't be worried about grasping and holding on to what you see on the slides. You can go over to those two boards and you'll see the same things there.
Thanks, Charlie. Although this is Charlie's last slide we didn't talk about, so I'll go ahead and cover that. But this slide actually indicates that there's a maximum block length required in the new zones that allows for more convenient pedestrian, in this case, Paseo connectivity through a block so that pedestrians or bicyclists don't have to go all the way around the block. So that's one of the standards in the new code. But I'm going to talk about design standards, and I will be at the station in the back with Rosie to talk further about this if you have specific questions. The general idea behind the zoning standards that we have in these three new zones is to ensure that the goals of the general plan are met, and that includes better connectivity for alternative modes like bicycle, pedestrian, and transit, but also a pleasant and attractive place for people to work and to live and to shop and to eat. So many of these standards that you'll see are organized in this way so that these principles are met in all of the zones. And I'll go through these individually. The relationship to the street that we have today in many of the areas that are currently M2 zone is that the buildings are set back and there's often parking between the building and a sidewalk, or in some cases not sidewalks at all. In the new zoning, there will be a requirement that buildings are built to what we call a built-to zone. So there's an area along the street where the building frontage in new development should be placed, and the building should not be set back too far. This, you see the photographs there where creates an envelope on the street and makes it a lot more pedestrian friendly and also a more attractive and comfortable place to walk and reside. Surface parking in the new zone will be generally required to be in the rear of the lot of the building along the sidewalks. Another concept is building mass and scale, and making sure that the mass of the building is appropriate for the kinds of uses there. The existing uses have buildings that are quite far set back. They're generally low slung, and in some ways they're not very interesting facades. The new buildings should have, there are requirements that there is a certain amount of scale provided along the building frontages along the street. These standards relate only to street frontages and do not have an opinion about the kind of development that happens off the street or in the back of the sites. This is only speaking about the public realm and the street realm. In the residential, this slide covers office and life science development, and the residential zone is there's somewhat different standards that relate to the scale and construction of residential buildings. At the ground floor, very important that pedestrians in particular have interesting aesthetics and appearance and responses to the ground floor uses there. And the existing uses are not very interesting, as you can see in these photos. The new uses will be required to have some amount of activity along the street, which should make it more interesting for office workers to get to lunch, for residents to walk around the streets as well. There's some standards about landscaping, about transparency, which is the amount of window frontage along the street, just to ensure that there's a lot more interest along street frontage. There's also provisions for awnings and canopies to provide shade. In the residential mixed-use area, it's not required that there be large windows along the street because there's privacy issues with residential, but there is some requirements for the amount of entries into units along the street to provide that kind of interesting frontage, and that residential units can be up off the street for a little bit of privacy to the sidewalk. There's also some open space requirements for all three zones. Currently, there's not open space requirements for the M2, and there will be a need when these new uses come for people to be able to gather, to meet friends, and to see other people on the street and comfortably hang out together. In the proposed zoning, there's a minimum percentage of open space required for the O and life science, the office and life science districts, and a different standard for the residential mixed-use district. But every district has some open space required, and some percentage of that open space that's required should be publicly accessible so that it's not behind fences, that it's available to passersby to use. Pedestrian bicycle connections are going to be quite important in the new zoning. This has already been mentioned. The block sizes in this area are quite large, and one of the things that will make it more interesting and livable area is a shorter block size so that there's a way to pass through blocks and pass through the area in a better way. The large parcels are meant to be broken down with the design standards, and there is a map that shows some proposed paseos and additional street connections that you can see in the back. One of the proposals is for paseos to be provided for new development, and there are some standards about how the paseos should be arranged, the amount of landscaping, the amount of tree coverage within the paseo, but generally to make it this is going to be a publicly accessible pathway and needs to be safe, convenient, but also attractive, and not just a slot between buildings. There's some design standards for building design, which currently there are no standards in the M2. The new standards will govern things like service, trash facilities, making sure that those are either out of the way or are screened appropriately. That there's high quality and durable materials used for all new development, and that the building facades and the roof planes have a lot of interest. Access and parking today is generally around there's a 360-degree parking often around the buildings in the M2 zone, and parking is typically in between the curb and the building. The new proposal will not allow for new parking for new buildings to provide parking in between the building and the sidewalk. Surface parking will be allowed behind the buildings. There's other requirements about setback to the street for where buildings can start. So there needs to be some landscape screening to parking. Garages, if there are parking garages, they should be lined with active uses or otherwise screened from the street so that people are not confronted with large-scale parking structures from the street. And then there's provisions about bicycle parking in all new development. So there's minimum standards, as Charlie has mentioned, about the numbers of parking spaces required for bikes. There's also standards about what the location should be, so that it's conveniently located near entries, and that the bicycle parking is close enough to entries where people will pass by and be able to watch out for the bikes and provide a safer environment for parking the bikes, and also that they be covered. and convenient, as I said, to the entries. With that, I think that concludes the presentation about the standards, design standards, and Debbie can talk about the next steps and the
I neglected to mention at the beginning, in order to make this presentation accessible to more folks, it's being videotaped. I hope that doesn't cause anyone concerns. I wanted to make sure to let you know, and I apologize I didn't tell you earlier on. So many, as you all know, city council meetings and GPAC meetings are videotaped. Typically, our Connect Menlo meetings, the city's Connect Menlo meetings are not. But again, in the interest of making the information accessible to more people, this is being recorded and it will be put on the Connect Menlo website. So if you have friends, neighbors, colleagues who couldn't make it tonight, who you think are interested, they'll have an opportunity to see the information on the website. So what we're going to do now is we are going to move into 3 topic stations. And we're going to have about 40 minutes or so for you to ask questions and give comments at the 3 stations. So the first one is the zoning regulations, right there, over there. The second one is design standards. So they're mixed up a little bit on this slide. The second one in the back is design standards. And then, oh, am I wrong? No, I'm right, okay. And then all the way over on that side is parking standards and transportation demand management. So what we're going to do at the stations is each station will have a city staff person and a PlaceWorks person at the station to answer your questions. So the questions that you hopefully were thinking about and holding till the end of the presentation, they'll be able to answer at the stations. We also are encouraging you, if you have comments on anything that you saw or heard, anything that you see at the stations, that you write your comments on the index cards that are at your tables. And there are little sticky dots at the stations that you can use to post them on the flip chart. And that is an efficient way for us to get as many comments as possible and to make sure that we capture them correctly in your own words. So we'll have about 40 minutes in the stations, and you can come and go as you please. I'll give folks a warning when there's maybe 10 or 15 minutes left, so if you have spent a bunch of time at one station, you want to make sure to make it to another one, you'll have the time to do that. And so a couple of the things that the city would really like to know from you are, what do you like about the proposed zoning and design standards and parking and transportation demands management measures? What do you like about them, and what would you change about them? What don't you like that you would change about them? So that's really the focus of the input that they'd like to get from you. And Charlie would like to add something.
Really brief, I just wanted to make one statement. It's probably obvious, but in any zoning code, in any design standard setup, and I do want to mention that the city council's direction to us was to do design standards, not guidelines. Meaning, it's not like this would be cool to do this. It's more like these are the things that we really want to see. But just keep in mind, when there's one picture with a bunch of call-outs about, what facades look like or roof lines or whatever, that one picture is not by any means the only way to achieve those objectives. There are thousands, there's an infinite number of great design ideas out there from architects and planners and designers, and so please don't think when you look at one picture that every building's going to look like that, or that's how it has to look. The pictures of the buildings just illustrate the features that are called out and described there. So Bruce can probably describe that in much greater detail when you have questions, but I thought everyone should.
Thanks, Charlie. So we actually have a little more time than I thought. We're going to go in the stations until close to 8 o'clock. And we'll plan to wrap up here at around 8:30. So after the stations, we'll come back and we'll try to summarize some of the major questions that came up at the stations. And then we'll take any other major comments or observations that people would like to make in a large group. And then the city will talk about some next steps. So with that, please feel free to go to the station of your choice, ask your questions, write your comments down, and post them. And then one last thing, if you have any comments that don't fall into any of those three categories, feel free to use this flip chart up at the front to post your comments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you to everyone for staying with us this long. I basically got two questions on zoning, both of which relate to housing. And one of them was about the Jefferson Drive area closer to between Chilco and Marsh. And the question was, there's 1,000 units there now in the residential mixed use from the maximum development potential map. Could we do more? And there's kind of two answers to that. One is, and they're both based on the environmental impact report, the environmental documentation, which is well underway. We went through a pretty long series of discussions with the community and the General Plan Advisory Committee, and I'll just be very honest, there was a major disagreement basically among Belhaven residents about how much housing is enough, how much is too much. You know, we've had a lot of housing built here disproportionately with the rest of the city. You know, is it affordable, is it not affordable? And where we ended up with in the General Plan Advisory Committee, largely because of some guidance and good direction from Commissioner Pressler, Planning Commissioner Kavani, and others, was let's really try to balance the jobs that are attributable to the new development under Connect Menlo with housing to match it. And so we ended up with 4,500 units, 1,000 of which are over on Jefferson Drive. And so the answer is, if we wanted to move those around, if we stayed with 4,500 units, but more should go over there, that's an alternative we can consider in the environmental impact report in the document. If we want to just build more than that and have it be in that area, the likely path of least resistance is to go forward with Connect Menlo as potential developers assemble those properties and think it's a good idea to build more than what's allowed there, is have them come on a project basis before the city, and what's in the terms of the California Environmental Quality Act, tier off of this EIR. Because the bottom line is if you're building more housing where more jobs are happening, that in itself is going to help mitigate traffic. So the mitigation arguments that are made through CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, would be pretty straightforward. So I don't want to make the answer any longer than it needs to be, but the idea is if you want to build more housing than the 1,000 units that are allocated towards Jefferson Drive, understand that there was a long conversation in the community, especially in Belhaven, and that there is a process to do that, but it probably is going to need to focus on those parcels. The other question I got a lot was, could we do a higher than 15% requirement for affordable housing that would be low and very low income, and maybe what's called moderate? And so these numbers are affordable, low and very low is below 80% of the area median income for this area. The moderate is between 80 and 120%. And before you think that sounds like a large number, that number is going to take into consideration households with teachers and firefighters and other professionals who are very important in the community. So there's a full range of housing needs. One of my favorite things that's happened in this whole process is when we had the Housing Commission meeting in here, and Pilar Lorenzo Campos from the Nonprofit Housing Association of the Bay Area said, you know what, we need housing for everybody. If you're stuck at the Novartin Bridge in the morning, there's Lamborghinis and Teslas as well as work trucks for people coming to do gardening and houses. So bottom line is we certainly need a lot of housing, not just in Menlo Park, but in the South Bay Peninsula as a whole. What we come down to is the question of, could we do a higher percentage than the 15%? So the 15% echoes the city's below market rate ordinance for ownership units, but you certainly could go higher. We've had a bunch of written comments, mostly by email, over the last couple of weeks, people asking the same question. So these kind of go together, because if you envision, say on the Jefferson Drive area, more units total, certainly more of those more units could be affordable. But that 15% was established to mirror the city's requirement for below market rates in ownership. The 15% that applies to the bonus level development, because it's an exchange of increased density with the city, could apply to more than just rental. It could apply to ownership, it could apply to rental. But should it be more than 15% is a comment or question we've had a lot over the last few weeks. So those are my two long-winded explanations of my two questions.
Okay. I had a lot of questions. Rosie and I were at the questions in general. Many of the comments we received were from developers and architects. As you can imagine, they're very, in some cases, they're concerned about the standards tying their hands and not allowing enough flexibility. So I have assorted the comments and questions into kind of three categories. One is, could there be more flexibility for creative solutions? For example, to allow buildings not to be necessarily linearly arranged along streets, but to be allowed to be arranged in a more creative fashion. That's something that I would say that we could think about, and as the dialogue continues, we'll try to understand whether there's ways to do that and still achieve the goals for the project. There's also, it was pointed out that there's a difference between applying these standards on very small lots that we have in some places like in the life science zone versus some very large sites. And could there be different standards, or the general attitude is that the small sites could use standards like these that are in a way more prescriptive, but the larger sites might want more flexibility to arrange projects in a way that works better for the developer. So there may be an exploration of the different of the size of site and the standards applied to the sites. So that's number two. And then there were different comments about the residential standards and the office and life science standards. And there's a general sense that the residential standards are fairly close, and developers can work within the system that we've set up with a couple of exceptions. However, the office and life science standards, there's a lot of pushback from this community, developer and architect community, to not have quite as much detail and modulation, what we call modulation, along the street, and have it be perhaps at a bigger scale than we're showing in our standards. So that was the kind of the third set of comments that we had from the design standards.
Hi everyone, sorry that was a longer walk than anticipated in the back. I'm Nikki Nagaya, the transportation manager for the city, and so we had a lively conversation about traffic and transportation on the back corner of the room. So the interesting part for me is that the comments were very much not focused on zoning. And so we appreciate a lively discussion. I think we had two key takeaways that weren't focused on really the parking standards or the specific TDM requirements per se, but were more focused on the broader picture look at traffic improvements, transportation investments that we can make or require as part of this process, and then ways we can generally reduce traffic to just make the impact less than what's anticipated with new development. So generally, I think the first kind of question that we talked about was really how can we more quickly build infrastructure to provide transportation choices for folks. And so we had a long discussion about different projects that are teed up for construction more immediately that we've presented in past workshops and open houses for this process and other places. But a few of the highlights from that discussion. So focused in the M2 area in Bellhaven, we have a project on Choco Street that our city council just approved a week and a half ago. And so we're moving forward in partnership with Facebook to construct some bicycle and pedestrian improvements along that stretch that have been long awaited. So we're excited to see that moving forward. Also in the M2 area, we have improvements on Haven, connecting between Marsh Road, where the Bay Trail ends today, and Bedwell Bayfront Park, and the Redwood City border, to add pedestrian and bicycle so bear with us during construction season, but we're excited to see a lot of infrastructure investments moving forward and put some of those grant dollars to work, so that's exciting. And then the second question about really trying to drive down and reduce traffic from additional development in the area. I think we had a lot of discussion about really the need to balance the desire to reduce traffic and provide the added development in the area that will help provide the services and the amenities that we want to see come out of this process. So we know that there's a line between those two somewhere, and we need to balance both sides and kind of reducing demand on the transportation system, specifically added vehicle traffic, but also providing facilities that give people choices and providing the development so that people have a place to walk and bike too. So that was a lot of where the conversation focused on traffic and transportation. Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask, this is the time, if anyone has any key insights, questions, comments, observations that you have not already had the opportunity to share, and that you'd like to share for the benefit of the group. We're interested in what folks have to say, so. Yeah, or you could go home. Well,
I just don't feel comfortable with the way that retail is configured. You know, it's so concentrated on Willow. I mean, just to me, you know, there's all this attention paid to pedestrian this and that, and the old street and all this stuff. And then, you know, I know this market, this plan's not supposed to be a huge market, but basically it's this isolated spot across from Willow that it doesn't, you know, to me, in terms of the way retail works and what you're trying to do to mix it, it doesn't seem to, it's not clear to me. Maybe on that side of the street it'll work well for those people, but for the people on the other side of the Willow, you know, it's there, it's going to be okay, you know, going to be okay. So I think it doesn't seem like there's enough retail flexibility with respect, I would say with respect to the existing residential area, which is remaining very homogeneous in its urban design. I mean, you know, if you don't create the opportunities for certain kinds of mixes of uses, well, you just won't have them. And I think this is going to become kind of more like what people, in ways, the kinds of settings people don't like than they do like, with respect to the way the retail is configured. That's my. I know there are a lot of constraints involved with like the site, you know, the sizes of sites and the parcels that are available, and Midtown has that strip in the middle and so on. Well, that's part of the problem. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't think more broadly about it.
So I want to make sure that the city and the consultants are hearing you correctly. It sounds like there's not enough retail flexibility, not enough options for retail.
Yeah, and on smaller scales.
Smaller scale.
Smaller scales.
So you would like to see
and
more.
Especially for across, you know, on the north side of Willow.
So you'd like to see more opportunity for small scale retail on the north side of Willow.
And I emphasize opportunity because of course it should, you know, it's up to the community. So not like downtown strip, but the opportunity for things, you know, to happen. They're more like Minalto Avenue over here in the Willows. Now, if it may not be economically, that may not be economically feasible. Well, if it isn't, then people don't do it. But you create, you know, the opportunity might be there. So, anyways, that's my thought.
Thank you, and thank you for providing a suggestion as part of your concern. Other comments, observations, questions?
You know, I really agree with what said, because it seems that I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, and that's the reason I haven't really said anything, I haven't really studied it, but it seems that lining all the retail up along Willow seems to me that that's going to create a problem. Now, what plans do you have with that connection? Because in
on Willow on both sides. I think what Mr. Cavani's talking about is that the site that's been identified for the grocery store, about 60,000 square feet, so a full-size market, not a super Walmart or anything like that, but like a full-size grocery store. I like to think of Whole Foods. Is indeed the largest site that would afford that kind of construction, but that doesn't mean it's the only place that can happen. But I think, to be fair, the vision really is from O'Brien to Hamilton to try to have retail lining both sides of the street at various different scales.
But, and so based on some earlier conversations, was that one of the concerns is, for example, the grocery store being on the south side of Willow. Willow's very hard to cross, and that's something that I know we have talked about in previous meetings. Also, that whole block where on the north side where, and John was just talking about this, where there's the mid pen proposed. Is there any opportunity? And I'm trying to refine or at least make sure I understand the comment, John. Are you suggesting that maybe retail should be the first floor of that along with it, so that there's retail on both sides?
I don't know what there's the right of way there, that street. That seemed like, that's sort of a natural place there where you could have something and I'm thinking about things on a small scale that would be, it wouldn't be destination spots at all. And if nobody wants to do it, then you wouldn't do it. But yeah, on that, on that side, and possibly going in, in a little bit into the community, so it's mixed, it's mixed up a little bit.
So it's more like a Minalta type of.
Yeah, exactly.
Smaller businesses.
Yeah. Now, whether that's economically feasible these days, I don't know. But you can zone for things, and if they don't happen, they don't happen. But you give you make it possible for people to put something together. Maybe you put two lots together to make something like that.
And then Rose, I think I understood that you were concerned about crossing the street to the south side.
Yes, because what is their plan for getting across Willow Road? Are you talking about grade separation and some way to get across out of that traffic? Otherwise, the community is disconnected to shopping again.
So I think the only piece of the question left is Rose's, which is what's going to make it easier to cross Willow. So there's all kinds of business reasons why a grocer might want to be on the south or east side of Willow, not the least of which is you'll capture a lot of traffic heading towards the number of cars going home thinking, oh, I can stop here and get groceries. But really, if you look at the pedestrianization and bicycle support plan that's built into the zoning, I actually think a blunt way to put it would be the idea is to make Willow so much of a main street and so much of a place to be that people will stop thinking of it as a way to get from 101 to the Dumbarton Bridge. And so you might envision a Willow that actually has stop signs at each corner instead of stoplights, that's narrowed. I know there's frontage issues in front of Mid-Penn, but there are examples like Shattuck Avenue and Berkeley where you have a frontage street for parking and then travel lanes. So I think the idealized vision is Willow's a place that you go to be there, not a place you try to pass through to go between two places. And then all of a sudden you have something more like Santa Cruz Avenue where vehicles have to stop and pedestrians get the right of way to cross at a street that's narrow. And that's the vision.
We'd like for it to be over there. I mean, it's great to be, instead of cluttering up things, we're already gridlocking the community, so it's great to be over there, but I just want to know what your plans are to be able to easily cross that.
That's the idealized plan, is have stop signs instead of stoplights, because the kind of traffic that's going through there is not through traffic, it's traffic trying to be in that location. And so drivers will have the mentality of, I'm going there. I mean, you wouldn't try to go through Santa Cruz Avenue instead of Sand Hill as a way to get from El Camino to 280. People who go to Santa Cruz Avenue are going there because they're going there. And so when they go 5 or 10 miles an hour between stop signs, they're not frustrated because they're not trying to get somewhere that's beyond it. And that's the idea.
Probably taking about an hour to cross that.
Right now, yes, I agree.
I just want to say, Charlie, I mean, that's a huge goal in itself. I mean, and not just to build these buildings, but to change Willow and the 80% regional traffic that's going there who's not interested, who just wanted the thruway and the California highway. I I mean, that's betting on a lot. What if that only partially comes true or never comes true? What's plan B? Then you do have the busy boulevard or whatever it is there, and it is, you know, kind of crummy. And I think there needs to be alternatives in case that's not going to happen.
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, you know, you have to have a vision, and the vision is achieved incrementally. And the incremental increase towards that vision starts with the urban design and the transportation connections and the nicer buildings, the nicer places to be. And, you know, all of our great downtown Main Streets, all our great neighborhood Main Streets got there organically over time. This is a 25-year vision, so I'd love for it to be achieved in one fell swoop, but I think we have a unique situation here in which we have some fairly capable companies that are very interested in this area, that have a lot of resources and are interested in the same things that the community has. I've often said in this process, this is an amazing coalescence of community interest, corporate interest, the tenants, you know, people who are moving here, people who live here a long time. So I think we have a unique opportunity here to make something like that happen much faster, much more efficiently than we do elsewhere. Certainly business as usual, what we have now is not sustainable. So any improvement is improvement, but I think there's room for a lot of improvement and probably for everybody. So where do we go from here? So you're all probably versed enough in Connect Menlo to know this is the first of 3 meetings like this in this particular project. So we are coming back here next week to the Senior Center March 10th to talk about green and sustainable building. So fairly similar to what you see about design, we'll have information both presented and available for your perusal and comment about what it takes to do green building. You know, it has costs, it has benefits, et cetera. That's next week. And then we'll be back. We're going to skip a week and we'll be back on the 24th to talk about this issue of community amenities. In other words, in the words of one Belhaven resident, how do I know what kind of and how much development I want unless I know what I'm getting for it? And so in those terms, we're going to take a look at what this scale of potential development could provide and look at the lists you guys have put together already and try to pare them down and talk sensibly about what are the right things to provide for comfort, convenience, and quality of life for Belhaven and the residents of Menlo Park. And Nikki, transportation manager, actually got to some of this when we were talking about transportation infrastructure. Then we are headed to the General Plan Advisory Committee for ostensibly what may be its last meeting on April 21st before we go to the Planning Commission in May with an updated draft of all these standards of zoning and design for the M2 area. And then we head towards the City Council, and we are on target for council consideration and approval in the fall. So any questions about the process or where we're going or what's next? Yes, John?
Yeah, there's a little bit of confusion. If I'm not mistaken, you're on 101 and on River Road headed toward Facebook, you're going due north. The east and west avenue, from what I can hear, I'm not.
Well, so if you're on Willow going towards 101 and going north, the Belhaven Triangle residential neighborhood would be to your west, and the former Prologis site now by Facebook would be to the east. But having grown up here, I've discovered that this is exactly the wrong place to use east, west, north, and south. And so I would just say the Belhaven residential side of the street, the Prologis side of the street, and I usually say bay, towards the bay or towards the hills. But right, if you're going, well, we're talking about the grocery store is when you're going towards the bay, is it on your right or is it on your right? I have little kids, so left and right can be difficult. Well, listen, thank you all for coming. We're going to put Deanna's information up because I know folks will get home and think, you know what, I should have said something, I'm going to email you. So here's our email and phone. I hope to see all of you and more. Please bring more people next week when we talk about green building. Thank you so much.